Hey, this is Tom Bentey, the Tom Bentey Media Podcast. I am here with the CEO of Boosh Foods, Mr. Jim Pakulis. He is flying out of Vegas, or no, he's flying out of Southern California, Orange County Air Force Airport to go back to his home state in Southern Utah. And he is here to talk all about Boosh Foods, plant-based products, the future of the food industry, and best practices that he's learned along the way as a CEO of major corporations and taking those corporations to the next level. So, Jim, thanks so much for joining us during your travel, and welcome to the Tom Bentey Media Podcast.
Tom, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
So, Jim, before we got on the podcast today, we were talking a little bit about your background, your history, and back in 2010, before the cannabis space really blew up to where it is right now. I'm from New Jersey. We just legalized cannabis today, actually.
Yeah,
It seems like you were on the ball with that way back in the mid 2000s. So how did you have that foresight to know that cannabis was going to be the wave of the future, even before there was much legislation gearing it in that way?
I didn't. Plain and simple, I didn't. What my group and I tend to look at is seeing what industries we believe will have significant growth over the long term, and just trying to connect the dots. I was very fortunate to have came across Weedmaps back in 2010. Zero revenues. As CEO, I did a reverse merger, took it public, grew it to about 16 million. And again, this is way back before anybody even had it on their radar. So you take a lot of arrows when you're the first one in an industry, especially an industry as polarizing as the cannabis space. But it was great baptism by fire, right? You have to jump into the lake and get wet. And so it was a great experience. Since then, fast forward real quick, a couple of years ago, my group and I we're agnostic in regards to what industries we like, but we were looking at an industry we felt had 5 to 10 years of strong continual growth. Did our due diligence on the plant-based industry, felt that this was an ideal opportunity to get into the space. And I specialize in emerging small cap companies, taking something basically back of the napkin and saying, hey, that's a really neat idea. How about if we blah, 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 and take it to the next level and grow it and build an infrastructure and then take it public and then provide the financing and continue and grow it. So that's my specialty. So we were fortunate enough, after looking at about 30 different companies, we came across Boosh, which is a plant-based, non-GMO, gluten-free, heat and eat, family-oriented meals. There are 6 frozen meals, 3 refrigerated meals, 2 shelf-stable meals, all under the Boosh umbrella. And we took them public, Boosh public, back in May of 2021, and it's growing nicely. They were in about 100 stores when we found them. They're in over 600 stores in Canada right now. It's all Canadian-based. And then most recently, we just finished the acquisition of Beanfield Chips. Beanfield, they're in about 7,000 stores and a relatively large entity, relatively speaking. And we just finished the acquisition of them. So we're incorporating them into the Boosh structure as we continue now and grow both Boosh and Beanfields.
Very cool. And what's the process like when you first get on board with a new organization, whether it be Weedmaps or Boosh? What's the process like working with the team that's there, bringing in new people, evaluating the company, and seeing how the progress can grow from there? What's that initial kind of first steps to lay the groundwork to have a successful workflow?
Yeah, great question. So the metrics, number one is the management. Do you subscribe to the same philosophies as the existing management does for whatever company we're looking at? And then next is scalability. Okay, so we have management and we think we can do well together, synergy. What about the scalability of the business? Can we be able to grow it? I think about the all-star games, right? Whether it's hockey or basketball, you got the best of the best that are out there playing. And usually it's just, run and gun. There's no continuity. There's very little synergy. There's great players, but they don't sync well together a lot of the times. And so that's really important that myself and my team that I have, we really mesh together and have the same philosophies going forward with whomever we're looking at, scalability, and then what's the likelihood, how long is it going to take to scale, and then what are those costs, what are the capital costs to get to certain levels, premeditated levels. So those are the things we look at, and above all else is just the integrity. You know, you got to work with people that have integrity, and that would be the biggest takeaway from anybody that wants to get into the small cap world or the business world, is just making sure you're working with folks that you have blind faith in, and you begin to finish their sentences. That's the type of folks we like to work with.
So it seems like there's a basic structure in place, but the way that's facilitated between organizations varies. But there's a basic process that you go through when you come on board to a new company.
Yes, yeah. And as we mentioned off air, you know, we spend so much time on due diligence before we go ahead and make that commitment, because we're committed for 2, 3, 4 years. It isn't just, you know, once every couple of months or once every quarter we do this. When we get involved, we get heavily involved, helping with the infrastructure, with management, with capital, you know, bringing in those capital needs. I work with a group up in Haywood. It's called Haywood Securities up in Canada, in Vancouver. And the individual I work with has a Rolodex of roughly close to 1,100 investors, retail investors, and most of them are accredited investors. So we like to be on the retail side of things. And the reason we like to have retail investors as opposed to institutional investors, even though it takes so much more work and paperwork, as opposed to having a dinner with a hedge fund and getting a check for $5 million, is because all of our investors are looking at this as a passive investment. They're the doctors and the teachers and the plumbers and the lawyers, and they'll put up 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 or $50,000, but it's not their main source of income as a hedge fund is. The other thing, unlike with hedge funds, they can have, we refer to it as gremlins in the documentation. They can come back and hurt you later on down the road, or demand that they have board seats, or want to reposition the company that they're getting involved in. So we really like to have retail investors as we grow the company. The other thing we concentrate heavily on, Tom, is we try to be as non-dilutive as possible in every step of the way. As an example, when we went public in May, a lot of our peers had 50, 100 million shares outstanding. Post IPO, we only had 16 million shares outstanding. When we went public, we had about $10 million of offers that came, verbal offers that came in, and we only took about $2.8 million. And again, that was spread out over 1,100 retail shareholders. We love to have a huge retail base and to be as non-dilutive as possible. That's our methodology. And even after acquiring Beanfields last month, for roughly 8 million shares, we still have less than 30 million shares outstanding. So though it's unaudited, we're just going through the audit. It's looking like a Canadian, about 15 million in annual revenue with Beanfields. So when you look at that and you look at, okay, less than 30 million shares outstanding between Boosh and Beanfields, north of 15 million Canadian revenue, that's a pretty nice proposition for an investor to really take a look at.
It seems, Jim, that you have a big passion for what you do, just listening to you talk. And I talk with my guests about the passion that they have, whether it be for creative arts, business. And I can see that you have that passion for Boosh. And can you talk a little bit more about the vegan industry, the plant-based industry, why you have such a passion for it, and why do you think it's going to be the wave of the future? And I think off air, we mentioned that you believe that a lot of these fast food chains are going to be bygones within the next generation or so.
If you came across with that interpretation, then my apologies. I think just the opposite, Tom. I think the fast food industry will continue and expand. I'm drinking. I just stopped. I'm at the airport right now. I just stopped at Collars Junior's, and I got a Beyond Meat burger. Right. So, I mean, the infrastructure for these multi-billion-dollar operations, whether it's Starbucks or McDonald's or Taco Bell or Pizza Hut, regardless of where they're all getting into the plant-based sector. Their infrastructure is already in place. So I think, in fact, the plant-based sector is going to enhance the growth of these various large franchises. Going to the first portion of your question, it's almost righteous, right? If you think about it, number one, you want to eat healthy. And I tell you, the generation that is really pushing this, the Gen Ys, the Gen Zs, the millennials, they're the ones that are really pushing, hey, they want to know what's going into their bodies far more than my generation ever was. So they want to know what's going on to their bodies. Number two, they want to take care of the animal kingdom. Again, probably more than my generation ever did. And then number three, we have very limited resources on planet Earth. I mean, there's only so much we can do. Population is constantly growing. And if you look at the ratios, and I'm just coming off the top of my head, it's like a meat-based hamburger may take, hypothetically 100 gallons of water from start to finish to get it into your hands, whereas a plant-based hamburger like Beyond Meat may take, I think, something like between 5 to 7 gallons of water. So the ratio is just so in favor of plant-based foods to help our limited resources on planet Earth. So when you combine those elements, again, it sounds a little superior, but it's almost a righteous industry. You're helping everybody. You're helping the earth. You're helping the animal kingdom. You're helping yourself. You feel good afterwards. You don't feel, bloated afterwards after you have a beautiful plant-based meal. And then the consumer, right? The consumer is going to say, okay, well, what are the key points for a consumer to buy plant-based? And it doesn't have to be vegan or vegetarian. It could be flexitarian. I'm flexitarian. I like to have my chicken and my fish, but I love plant-based foods as well. So what are the key elements? Number one is taste. 10, 15 years ago, you did not have the variety of products that are in the stores today. In fact, a lot of stores are doing tenant improvement to increase their frozen sections in grocery stores in order to be able to accommodate more plant-based foods, since plant-based foods tend to have less preservatives in them. So taste. Number two, the price points is critical. You have to make sure you're within a price point and price range to move forward. And then the ability to get those foods. You have to, if you're going to get plant-based food, you want to make sure they're in the grocery stores. So these are the key elements that we try to really concentrate on as we continue and grow Boosh and bean fields.
I'm sorry if I got that wrong. So it's okay. You feel that fast food is going to continue, but it's going to be a switch from meat-based fast food to more plant-based fast food based on everything that you just stated, right?
Yes.
There.
Yep. And we're seeing that already, right? We're seeing it already.
Now, one of the things that I've noticed is like McDonald's, obviously 70s, 80s, they're this huge corporation. They had a hard time coming back really from that 2004 documentary, Super Size Me. Yeah, so right. How does a company that's traditionally known for hamburgers and French fries, how do they successfully transfer to more plant-based and be, showcase themselves in a new light, but also at the same time hold true to their brand values?
That is a great question. And I don't know the answer. I can only surmise. I think it's simply reaching out to their audience, asking their audience what they want. And the audience is telling them, yeah, it's a younger generation. And yeah, their parents or their uncles and even a little bit, they may have grown up on fast food, but it just ain't healthy for you. And so by listening to their consumers, they're able to go ahead and add on to their menus things that potentially are healthier, such as I just mentioned, Carl's Jr. here at the airport. They have 15 different items, but I went immediately to the plant-based hamburger and it tastes great. You put an onion and some onion on it and some cheese and it tastes fantastic. So I don't know definitively. I just think that they're listening to their customers and the customers are going to dictate to them what the future is going to hold as it relates to what these franchises offer.
Gotcha. And I think that's a great response to it. It takes a give and take, and you really have to listen to the audience. And one of the things that I do, I'm a video producer. I create marketing videos. I create content for big corporations, and it's all about messaging. It's about understanding who they are and showcasing that in a compelling, entertaining message. And now with technology, maybe even an interactive message. So with the companies that you've worked with, I'd love to learn more about how you go about messaging, how you showcase those brand values, how you get the message to the consumers via video, via social media, via traditional media. How is your process and messaging is so important. Can you talk about how you go about working with companies and showcasing their message?
Sure. I think with smaller companies, you have to start with a guerrilla warfare, a guerrilla tactic to get your message out. As an example, the founder of Boosh, Connie Marples, celiac by nature, and consequently she created these recipes herself. When she first started in 217, 218, she literally took her Ford Explorer Expedition and wrapped Boosh all over it, and literally drove to the stores herself with the various products that were co-packed for her under the Boosh label, and started to sell that way, doing the Facebook, doing the LinkedIn, getting the word out there from a guerrilla tactics standpoint. Before you have a budget, to see if it flies, to see if the model works, you have to prove your model in any situation before you can go ahead and start deploying real capital into it. So that's when you take something at the embryonic stage, which is what Connie did, and you go ahead and grow it that way. I think you have to use this guerrilla tactics, and then you start implementing other methodologies, whether it's print, digital, TV, whatever it may be, as the budget permits. Now, so if you look at the evolution of a business, and evolution of a business is like evolution of a society. You have the birth, the embryonic, the infantile, the growth, the hypergrowth, the maturity, and then decline, right? That's the cycle. That's the cycle of just about every business, maybe every business. In that cycle, Boosh is from the embryonic to the infantile. Now in that cycle, Beanfield, the company we just purchased, which is in 7,000 stores and started in 2010, is at the growth, starting to get into the hyper growth phase. So the methodology to push out that is different than a company that's in the earlier stages. And that we've sat down and prepared budgets just for everything we've just talked about, the different types of marketing, in order to continue and get that out there, including using influencers. I think they may have peaked a little bit in 217, 218, but there are still some key individuals out there that can help assist in moving your product. And then it's just word of mouth. Is the product any good? And for instance, Beanfields is phenomenal. I mean, I would take a bag of Beanfields over a bag of Doritos any day. So in short, it depends on what part of the growth curve your company is in, what your sales are, how big you are right now, and then you have to dictate a budget accordingly.
Great. Now, you mentioned the last phase being the decline. How do companies in a day and age where we see these big behemoths of the past, Kmart, Sears, other companies as well, going out of business, not being able to keep up, Toys R Us, a big New Jersey company that went out a few years ago. How do companies miss that part and continue to grow? How do they continue to progress when a lot of them fall off the wayside because of decline?
It's a great question. I grew up in upstate New York in Rochester, and Kodak is another perfect example. When I was growing up, Kodak was everything, and then fast forward 20 years, and I'm sure you read the business news. Look at Netflix. For the first time in 10 years, it's seeing a decline in subscription. First time in a decade, it's seeing a decline in subscription. So what's happening? More and more services are streaming their product, streaming their movies, streaming their material, and Netflix may start to become antiquated. So to answer your question, management has to stay nimble. You have to stay humble. You have to stay nimble. You have to stay in your lane, and you have to constantly, in my opinion, you have to constantly produce for the consumer. You always have to be consumer facing. You can't be internally dictating what a company is going to do based on meetings and based on, groupthink within the company. You have to constantly be pushing out to the consumers and getting their feedback and getting their input in order for that company to succeed. And I've never been in this position, but if you're the CEO of a Kodak or a Netflix, and you may be living in the Ivy Tower, and you're not reaching out enough. I don't know, but I think Richard Branson's a great example. He constantly is evolving, and it seems like he's constantly touching the consumer in a figurative way in order to make sure they're having the best experience possible. Because if they're not having a great experience, they're never going to come back. There's too much competition in everything. We're not going to be able to create really anything new anymore. We're going to be refining things, but we're not going to be able to really recreate anything new. So you have to be consumer facing and help the consumer every step of the way and have them love you. That's really what you need to do, in my opinion.
That's a great take on it. And it seemed like generations ago, a lot of companies were very hesitant to do that. It seemed like they lived in that ivory tower. If you look at Yellow Pages, and they just were blind to the reality of what was happening. Kodak and they failed, and it's, they just didn't change, and they saw the signs. I mean, it was clear as day, but for whatever reason, they decided not to acknowledge that truth and reality, and ultimately it gave way to decline. But it seems like a lot of the newer companies are very cognizant of what you just talked about, understanding the consumer. Everything is changing, being aware of that and changing based on the consumer's needs. Now, it'll be interesting to see what happens with Netflix. They've put so much money into content. They pay some of their content creators an incredible amounts of obscene amounts of money. Where else can they go if they've went around the world and everyone who's going to sign up for Netflix already has Netflix? Now, I'm a huge Netflix fan. I love their content, probably more than any other streaming service. But what's left for them to do? What can they do? They said they're going to stop the sharing. Is that going to make a huge difference? Maybe. And I get it. They have to figure out like how they can compete with all these other platforms, because they were essentially the first, and now you have like over a dozen. So what do?
Yeah, great question. And stopping the sharing, I think, okay, you're going to stop the sharing, but then you're going to perturb individuals who are sharing, and they may just drop you.
Yeah.
So here's just one example. Like, I use Amazon Prime all the time. With Amazon Prime, I'm watching a movie, and if I want to fast forward it, I can fast forward it, and then it picks back up. Netflix doesn't allow me to do that. So just as one example of benefit feature, as far as, geez, I've already seen the movie. I didn't want to watch this 15 minutes of it again. I wanted to see the next 15 minutes, but I got to sit through that. It's the little stuff. It's consumer facing. It's, Netflix fixed my problem for me. That's how I see it. Amazon fixed that problem, and it's fantastic. Netflix hasn't. So if they keep on missing these little hints that what the consumer wants, then they will be in a free fall.
That's a great point. Now, just stay on media for a second here. I'm a filmmaker. I'm an actor. I do video production. And I was someone who went to the movies pretty continually up until the pandemic. Since the pandemic, I've only went like maybe once, maybe twice. I would love to get your take on movie theaters. Do you think they come back? Now, I see Lowe's, they had that spike during the whole GameStop thing, and then they came down a little bit, but they're still pretty high. I mean, originally I thought movie theaters weren't going to come back, but now seeing like Spider-Man, seeing Batman, seeing the Sandra Bullock film, and they have really high attendance, and they're having high grosses. Now I'm not so sure. And I would love to get your take if you have any sort of insight on that.
I think 100. Sorry about that, Tom.
No problem.
Thank you, sir. 100% they're going to come back. It's not the movie. It's a social event. It's a social event for teenagers. It's a social event for really anybody. I just gravitate because that's where I went to the movies all the time when we were teenagers. It's not just going to see the Spider-Man movie. It's going to have an event with your friends. Who's picking who up? What are we going to do before? What are we going to do after? Can't wait to see the movie. Oh, the girl's going to be at the movie. I don't know. Did you find, it's a bunch of different components into one for people going to the movies. I'm very bullish on the movie theater. I see it definitely an uptick. People also go to the movies when times are tough. We have some of the worst inflation in the last century. We have we obviously the war overseas. We have consumer goods that are just going crazy expensive. We just got out of two and a half years of COVID, which was very challenging. So people are overall angry, frustrated, and tired. What's better? Going to a movie and having fun with your friends. So that's what I think that's going to continue. Now, will that theater experience, again, being consumer facing, will it enhance? Yeah, they have to start, have real food, have drinks there, and some movie theaters do that, but make it so it's consumer facing. So I have to go. It's not an option on Friday night. It is so cool to go there that I have to go. That's how the movie theaters should be thinking, and they will then crush it.
That's great. And I think I've always said that they should make the movie theater somehow, if it's logistically possible, to make it more like a film festival. Get some sort of interface with the director, the cast, either Zoom, in person. that is such a great experience when you go to a film festival and you have an extra bonus when they talk about the creative insight, when they talk about production hurdles, when they talk about just the experience of being on set. I love that. And if they can bring that to like a mass audience, and film festivals are so popular, but if they could do that at a commercial level, I think that'll really enhance the movie going experience.
Boy, you're spot on that. And I'm thinking through that. It would be so difficult to get those individuals, but you could also have a little 5 or 10 minute expose at the beginning or at the conclusion of the movie of just the cast sitting around talking and about their experiences. You always want to hear that, get that extra credit, right? The one-liners that you didn't get in the movie, or how they interacted with each other in the movie theater. That's a great idea. I'd see another consumer facing thing to get me to the movies, to want to sit there and watch the movies and even stay after the movie and then buy more stuff.
Exactly. Now, Jim, you've had some great success in your career. If you could bestow upon my audience just any tricks or insights that you've learned along the way that can really help people, whether they're involved in investment, whether they're involved in creative arts, business, just some general life advice that someone that has had really great success could provide to my audience.
Expedite your failures in order to increase your successes. Everyone has to fail. You have to go through failures. And today we've been, thank you very much for talking about a couple of the highlights, but there's just as many failures out there too that I've been involved in. So and you have to go through that learning curve. And then once that's done, you have to pick yourself up, shake yourself off and say, okay, what did I learn from that experience? You just got your butt kicked. What did you learn? Okay, how am I going to better it on the next experience? And then it's like a snowball that eventually just accumulates this knowledge that you have. But you have to go through the failures. You just have to. No one ever doesn't fail. Everyone fails along the journey, and it's how you act. The second piece would be, as I mentioned earlier, just the integrity. It's being truthful, having integrity with the folks you work with, saying what you mean, meaning what you say, walking your talk. I think those would be the two takeaways that I would offer, Tom.
I think that's spot on. I think failure is just a part of life. It's a part of your personal life, your professional life. And there's two ways you can go about it. You can just let it knock you down and you can stay down there. And there's plenty of people that have done that. Or you can, like you said, you can learn from that experience, grow and move forward, and understand that everyone fails. It doesn't have to define you. It only defines you if you let it define you. But you could use that experience to really better yourself and to progress and to grow and to learn. And if you look at life like that, like it's a never ending journey, right? There's always things to learn, and not think of it as a hurdle, but think of it as a wonderful challenge that can make your life interesting and rich. And I'm watching the Ken Burns documentary on Benjamin Franklin.
Right on.
He was always reading, always learning, always progressing. He was a master at print and master at the written word. Then he got into science and politics and just learning. That was his life. Same thing with Thomas Edison. Always learning, always growing, always progressing. Not to think of it, I have to do this or I have to read this, but that's what life's all about. To make a rich, wonderful life is to learn, to grow, and to not shy away from it, but to embrace it every step of the way. And then who knows where you can end up, right?
That's right.
Who knows the potential that you have inside you. And I think it seems like you have that mindset, and I'm really inspired. And I thank you so much for talking to my audience and bestowing that knowledge upon them. But I really appreciate your passion, sir. I'm looking forward to trying some Boosh foods.
Right on.
As we end here, can you just tell us a little bit about what's the future of yourself and Boosh, and where things are headed?
Yeah, we're in it to win it. As we talked about earlier, the market is still in the very early stages. Tremendous potential growth in the plant-based industry. Yes, there's a lot of competition, but you just have to. You just very clearly said it. It's a marathon. So get ready for a long marathon. And Boosh and Beanfields are ready for that marathon and ready for success and growth. And as I said earlier, everyone checks their egos at the door, stays in their lane, and goes to work. And I believe that those are the critical elements for success, Tom.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Jim. Appreciate your time. Safe travels, and let's keep in touch, sir.
Sir, thank you so much.